Hello friends. The 640 days of the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. That night, Russia launched a record number of kamikaze Shahid drones across Ukraine. The main direction of attack was Kyiv. This raid was the most massive since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. The alarm in the capital lasted more than 6 hours. The drones entered Kyiv in waves, in numerous groups, in different directions, constantly changing course along the vector of movement. The Air Force said it shot down 74 Russian drones out of 75 launched. About 40% of the targets were destroyed by mobile fire groups of the Ukrainian armed forces. One must think that the remaining drones were shot down by air defense missiles. During today's massive attack, the Russians used black and carbon-coated drones. This was stated by Air Force Speaker Ignat. They have previously improved the drones that they received from Iran and those that they make themselves, using composite materials there for the reflective surface. Now we see that they used carbon material. Carbon, which is an absorbing material for radar signals, and black color, it's clear why. This will complicate the work of air defense, namely the visual reference to the target of mobile fire groups, he said. The third wave of the Russian offensive continues near Avdiivka, which is characterized by the inclusion of new attack directions through the southeastern industrial zone, as well as from Donetsk. The head of the city administration, Barabash, said that the Russian army has changed tactics and is no longer attacking in columns. The first wave was like they were going to a parade. The second wave was that the columns were divided and they tried to move from at least 3 directions. Now they have opened a 4th direction, from Donetsk, from Spartak, plus they added an industrial zone. They are trying to expand more along the front line, he said. At the same time, the weather does not allow Russia to use a lot of equipment. However, she still drives through the industrial zone, since there is some asphalt pavement there. Barabash says that the Russians are coming in all directions, from the flanks, from the south, from the north. Aviation is actively working, delivering dozens of strikes with controlled aerial bombs and cluster bombs. The fact that the Russians began to carry out a third wave of assault near Avdiivka was also previously reported by the commander of the Southern Front, Tarnavsky. According to him, the Ukrainian armed forces are steadfastly holding the line, while Russia is suffering heavy losses in manpower and equipment. A video of a fierce battle near Avdiivka, filmed from the Ukrainian side, has appeared on the internet. In it, a detachment of Ukrainian fighters from the 47th Brigade attacked Russian tanks, and there was a threat of encirclement. The continuation of the video shows that the commander decided to leave the position and evacuate to the rear in 2 Bradleys. The group also had a wounded soldier who had to be carried to the evacuation infantry fighting vehicle. After delivering the fighters to the rear, they were loaded into an ambulance. Telegram channels write that this episode was filmed in the Stepovy area, where the Russians are conducting active assault operations. According to Telegram channels, the most active fighting is now taking place there, as well as from the industrial zone. Friends, this channel exists solely thanks to your support. If you have the opportunity and desire to support the channel, I will be very grateful to you. Thank you very much. The Ukrainian military resource deep state shows little progress of the Russians in their attack on the city recently. The Telegram channel writes that in the southeast of Russia there is progress in the area of the Vinogradniki gardening partnership. The enemy's offensive is also taking place on the northern flank, near Stepovy, where the Russians, as the Telegram channel writes, have a 5-fold advantage in manpower. Russian sources also write about a new attack from Yasenovata and an advance along the industrial zone on the southern flank, but expect Ukrainian counterattacks, since the terrain is difficult to hold after powerful artillery and airstrikes. In turn, the Ukrainian military, who are in Avdiivka, talk about the difficult situation in the city, about the advancement of the Russians, and call for them to take off their rose-colored glasses. According to one of the military men who posted a video on TikTok, Russia's advantage is that the Russian economy works for the war, but this is not the case in Ukraine. He said Ukraine's armed forces are running low on shells and drones, resulting in many units killed and wounded. Near Bakhmut, the Russians are trying to advance through plantings to the dominant heights west of Klishchiivka. The enemy continues to put pressure and probe the defense in order to find weak points. The Russians are becoming more active both in the area of the settlements of Klishchiivka and Andriivka, and in the north of Bakhmut. Ukrainian fighters are holding their defense with great difficulty, writes the Deep State Telegram channel. That is, even on the southern flank of Bakhmut, where Ukrainian troops had recently been advancing, the enemy is now attacking. To the situation in the south. Ukrainian Telegram channels previously massively published videos allegedly from a liberated village on the eastern shore of the Kherson region. Military resource Deep State reports that this video is from last year. Such flirting with society has an extremely negative effect and only increases disappointment due to inflated expectations, comments Deep State. He reports that in fact, on the eastern shore, the Marines are still continuing heavy battles to hold the bridgehead in Krunki. It's too early to talk about any liberated settlements. Moreover, the Russians have increased their reserves. And Russian air bombs will continue to create a lot of problems until the long-awaited F-16s arrive, writes Deep State. Ukraine has gone on the defensive, and the Russians are now stretching the Ukrainian armed forces across the entire front. This opinion was expressed by former Deputy Minister of Defense Maliar. Their task is to exhaust us completely and prepare for some next actions. We must know about this, the military knows about this, of course, and we must prepare for these things. Not only are we now on the defensive, but we must understand that they deliberately deplete absolutely the entire front line in order to further implement their tasks in some other way, said Maliar. She is confident that the trend of exhaustion is being used by Russia for a reason. They are being depleted in order to take subsequent actions after this. And we must know and prepare for this, added the ex-Deputy Minister of Defense. Many experts are already saying that Ukraine should go on the defensive. At the same time, the official position of the authorities is that Kyiv intends to adhere to an offensive strategy with access to the 1991 borders. However, judging by other actions, a large-scale defensive effort is already beginning. Yesterday it became known that an interdepartmental working group on the construction of fortifications will be created under the Ministry of Defense. The Minister of Defense and the Minister of Digital Transformation agreed on this. They want to entrust the construction of the first line of defense to the military, the second and third to the State Agency for Reconstruction and Infrastructure Development through the involvement of private contractors. The same agency, along with business and regional administrations, will finance the project. Let me remind you that the Russian defense in the south, which the Ukrainian armed forces were never able to overcome, was also built with the involvement of state companies, governors, and private companies. Considering that Ukraine is announcing similar efforts, it is likely that Kyiv is heading towards building its own defense lines similar to those built by the Russians in southern Ukraine. However, in addition to the lines of defense, as well as weapons, there is another painful issue: people. President Zelensky said yesterday that changes to mobilization are being prepared. I instructed to prepare comprehensive solutions, President Zelensky said. According to him, a new comprehensive mobilization plan will be presented next week. According to former Deputy Defense Minister Maliar, regarding mobilization, the time for popular solutions has passed. The time for popular solutions has already passed. They can no longer exist in such a complex war. We must understand that this is a long road. And there are some unpleasant things along the way. The Russians simply physically have more people, and we have a smaller army. We have fewer weapons. I frankly don't understand why mobilization is such a terrible topic for society. War in general is terrible, and during the war there will be mobilization, said Maliar. And the secretary of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on National Security, Kostenko, said that after the mass dismissal of military commissars by presidential decree, there was a failure in mobilization, which is why now the problem of mobilization is even more acute than the shortage of shells. Kostenko believes that a situation has developed that needs to be quickly influenced, otherwise Ukraine will have very big problems. According to him, unpopular decisions by the political leadership are needed. In particular, reducing the age of mobilization. Former advisor to the office of the President Arestovich considers the success of the Ukrainian armed forces on the battlefield impossible or very difficult. He attributes this to the fact that the West does not provide weapons in the required volume, and if they do, it will take 6 to 9 months to prepare fighters for their use. But recruiting sufficiently motivated fighters with the current approach to mobilization and properly training them given the very poor level of administration will be problematic. And Russia will build even more defensive lines during this time. According to Arestovich, then even with the F-16 and ATACMS, Ukraine will be able to inflict significant losses on Russia, but not pass all these lines. At the same time, he does not believe in sufficient quantities of weapons supplied by the West. He says that the European Union simply does not have it in such volumes, and the United States does not want Ukraine's complete victory over Russia on the battlefield in order to prevent Moscow from becoming even closer to China. The defeat of Russia on the battlefield is considered a dangerous option in the Biden administration. They don't want to do this, says Arestovich.